Recently, a next door neighbor of mine, a fine young man, relapsed and died of a drug overdose. And his former girlfriend is incarcerated for the same powerful addiction. I know of nothing that can beat addiction except faith. And Cassie Ritt will probably acknowledge that is the case. We are blessed to have her on My Faith with Homer and Pip and a connection with our incredible producer, Brent Young. So, Homer, this is your vision. We're so grateful for Cassie Ritt. Take it away, brother.
I can't wait. I knew it was going to be good. She's smiling already. I don't know the whole story. I know a little of it, just what you said. So I want to know where Cassie is going to start her faith and where she chooses to give us the beginning. Cassie?
Well, I was very blessed to have two parents who raised me up in a church. I went to a Protestant church, High Point Church in Madison, Wisconsin. And that's really where everything started for me. I've been going since probably before I can remember. So continuing on with that, when I was younger, going with my parents, being involved in like the children's ministry, and then moving to, the large ministry was definitely a blessing because it gave me a really great foundation. And it was definitely a foundation I relied on much later in life to kind of bring me back from some pretty rough situations. So just growing up with that has really probably saved me in more ways that I know, because it was at the core of who I was. I just seemed to have lost it for a little while. So when I was growing up, I had a great childhood. I became very actively involved in swimming. I was a competitive swimmer for 10 years. I went to high school, swam for their team. I was an All-American in high school, a nationally ranked swimmer outside of the high school season with USA Swimming. And I'm not really sure how far to go into that, but
keep going. Keep going.
But along the way, the best stroke that I had competitively, I was a great sprint freestyler, and I was a sprint backstroker, and a little bit to my demise, I was a sprint butterflyer. And if you guys know anything about swimming, that butterfly is a killer on your shoulders. And I ended up at 15 years old, I was injured doing the butterfly. I had torn my rotator cuff in my shoulder. And when I had gone to the doctor and to physical therapy, they prescribed me Vicodin to get through that. And it was fine at first. Obviously, my dad kept control of all those things. He didn't, I was distributed them when I needed them, and we tried to move forward from it, made a little bit of progression as far as the injury went, competed the next season, did very well. But it was a recurring injury that never really went away. And I was continued to be prescribed to them. And at a certain point, the injury just took too much hold for me. It wasn't allowing me to train and practice in the way, and compete also in the way that I should have been able to compete. And, but the prescriptions never stopped, even though swimming came to a halt for me. I was not able to compete at a collegiate level because of that. I was offered scholarships and places. I did many recruit trips at different colleges, St. Cloud, UW Whitewater, UW Eau Claire. I looked at Madison for a brief period of time until I realized that was a little bit out of my range academically because I wasn't the best student in the world. And that kind of put a halt to that, but it definitely didn't stop the pills from coming. So I continued to take them, and I ended up being in a pretty toxic relationship with a guy who liked to use them extracurricularly. And when he found out that I had a prescription for that, we started abusing them together. So that really, I think that's was the first initial start of my downfall, obviously. And as I continued down that path, not only did my self-esteem go down the toilet, but my faith also started to go. I became much less concerned. I would go to church when I felt guilty, or my parents would kind of be trying to offer that lifeline to me. And I would sit there in church and I would listen, and I would just be watching the clock, waiting to leave. I wasn't really concerned with what they were saying. And if something did strike a chord with me, I was overly emotional because I was so racked with guilt and shame about how I was living my life. And unfortunately, that wasn't enough to stop me. And that continued to not just abuse of prescription medication, but also the start of my addiction to heroin. So it became much more affordable and accessible to me. And so I went down that path. And unfortunately, I didn't go to church at all anymore. I didn't want to pick up a Bible. I didn't want to read verses. My dad would always try to extend little verses to me, send me things, the daily bread, anything that he could try to like get me to see or strike a chord with me that maybe might help me. I just completely ignored them. And it got to that point where I never stopped believing. I just stopped wanting to hear about it. I didn't want to hear about any of it anymore. And so that was probably one of the lowest points I've ever been at in my life. But God's funny because he likes to tell jokes and play jokes on you. And he's a great guy. He's hilarious because he sent me 2 angels to my house on January 3rd, 2013, after a very long and pretty ridiculous battle with addiction. And he sent them in the form of 2 federal agents. And I was arrested for distribution of heroin on that day. And I didn't know it then. Of course, you know, the first initial reaction is to be angry, to be in denial, to lie to yourself and say you didn't do any of these things and try to weasel out of anything that you can. And I didn't know that that day was the day he saved my life.
Let me just ask the number of years from when you told us the beginning. So at what age did this start? Maybe with the boyfriend, and then I'm guessing you had to sell it in order to be able to get it, or how long? What was something to 2013? How long was that process?
I started really abusing the prescription to the point where I needed it to be able to function. There's like a brief moment in time probably before that where it was just like a recreational thing or something to fit in or do, you know, what they were doing. And it was when I was 18 years old that I really started to abuse the prescription at that point, which I'm terrible with math. It's got to be like 2008, 2009, right in there.
So we're talking 5 or 6 years.
Yes.
Of a mess.
Of a wreck. Of a wreck.
Okay.
And it graduated from just taking a pill or, you know, just snorting a line, if I can be very direct, to intravenous drug use, which is a rabbit hole all in itself. Once you go to that extreme of the addiction, there's not, I don't know a whole lot of people that ever came back from that. They didn't go back to just popping a pill or just snorting a line. That's like a whole nother addiction within itself. The needle is a whole nother addiction. And unfortunately, it can cause you what might take a year or 2 to get you really addicted and bad. The needle will take one time for me, really. I couldn't get enough of it. So it really takes you down a whole different path of addiction. So it was 5 years of an absolute train wreck. So.
And now they visit. They visit because they have information that you'd been selling it, or what?
Yeah.
What did they charge you with at that time, and where did it go from there?
I was charged, I had 4 separate counts on my indictment. 2 of them were distribution, and 2 of them were distribution resulting in bodily harm. Unfortunately, as we've, you know, talked about earlier at the beginning of the show, people pass away from this disease. I am very blessed and I'm very grateful that the gentleman that was involved with me, he's not passed away. He did have an overdose, and he is alive today. He's doing very well as far as I know. But that doesn't stop you from charging or stop them from charging you with that kind of thing. and I guess rightfully so. It's a crime that I committed. So, but it's an unfortunate statistic that people do pass away from that, and then people are, as a result, charged with something like that. He is not. So I don't want anyone to think that happened, because it didn't. But those 4 counts were enough to give them reason. Obviously, they had enough evidence. I didn't know that they had been building a case on me for approximately 3 years. So they had been watching me for quite some time. And at first, when you're faced with all of those counts, the maximum sentence that I could have received was 20 years. So it was a pretty hefty weight to be hit with, but obviously God had another plan.
I'm afraid to ask what was next.
Well, I was escorted by these 2 federal agents to the Dane County Jail in Madison, Wisconsin. And at that point, I don't know if I had a moment of clarity after I was done trying to fight it. I was, of course, you're trying to figure out, how can I get out of here? What can I say or do? How much money do I have to pay or come up with? And they told me that there was no bond for me. There was no bond. There's no way out of this. You're going to stay there. And at that point, it was kind of like, I don't want to fight anymore. I want to be done. I don't want to do this anymore. And so for the next 3 weeks, I went through probably the worst heroin withdrawal that I've ever experienced in my life. And it was probably the first time there's no help there. They don't offer you any kind of comfort, drugs, or any kind of muscle relaxers, nothing. It was a cold turkey, intense withdrawal in a really yucky county jail. So at that point in time, I was reaching for anything, because my drug was gone, my comfort and what I sought safety and comfort in was gone, and the only thing left there, and really the only thing I had or was allowed to have in my possession, was a Bible. So there's God being funny. He's gonna get there. He's gonna get you back. And that's when I had that moment of clarity. That was about all I could cling on to, was him. So
you have a Bible. You aren't required to read it. I'm afraid you have all these things I'm afraid to ask. Did you feel at some point you were going to die, or is the recovery so painful? And then you see the Bible, you have the Bible. How many days till you said, I'll open it up, or what? Because as you had lived, the present doesn't mean that you're going to participate. Right. You at some point chose to open it.
Yeah. I felt like I was going to die. I did not die. Actually, it's one of the things that keeps me on the straight and narrow today, is knowing that that's the raw and honest truth of addiction. The high is not the truth. The high is the lie. The honest and true part of the addiction is how you feel without it. And I don't ever want to experience that again. That type of physical anguish is not something that I would ever wish on anyone. But just needing to reach out for something. It didn't take me long. And I relate that back to, how my parents raised me and built me up, was with God as my support. So I probably let it go 24 hours before I opened that Bible. And it was just one of the jail Bibles. It wasn't one of, it wasn't a personal Bible at that point. But they are able, families can send you like a Bible in or books in or things like that when you're in county jail. And that was something that my mom sent me pretty quickly, was a Celebrate Recovery Bible. And I actually still have that today. And it's got highlighters and Post-it notes and stuff all in the margins and everything like that. So that's been carried with me from county jail to prison in Alabama. When I was transferred out of county jail and designated to a federal prison, I went to one in Alabama. And then after 3 years there, it also followed me to the prison that I stayed at for the last part of my sentence, which was in Greenville, Illinois, that's the federal camp for women in Greenville, Illinois. And that Bible is now in my bedside drawer. So it's
So
travel.
you're in federal prison for how long?
I did roughly 6 years in federal prison for those crimes. On the day that I was the day that I did a plea hearing, see, God blessed me a little bit more during this time. There was a point where the only way that you can be released is into the custody of someone that's going to take full responsibility for you 24 hours a day. I spent about 3 months trying to convince my parents to take this responsibility on. And it's something that you have to ask the courts for. Like I said, there was no bond for me. There was only this option. And initially it was not an option that they were going to go with. They would not let me leave just because they assumed I was a flight risk. And obviously my addiction was pretty bad at that point. So they would not allow me to leave. 3 months later, I stood in front of a court judge and I asked him to give me 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks before my plea hearing. And I asked him to give me that 2 weeks to spend with my family because I knew I was going to prison at that point. And I knew that I would be probably far away from them because there are no prisons for women in the state of Wisconsin, federal prisons. So he said yes. He granted me the ability to go home with my mom and dad after they agreed to take custody of me, basically. And the prosecution countered immediately within 30 seconds and wanted to counter that situation. So at that point, I had to appear about 10 minutes later in front of the judge who sentenced me to ask her basically the same thing and give her the final ruling on whether this would be something that the court would approve or not. And I remember going back into the waiting space for me and being so nervous because I was so excited that the first judge said yes, but then prosecution immediately countered and said no. And I remember sitting there and just praying, like, you know what? It's you. It's your will. It's not mine. It's yours. If you want me to go home and spend 2 weeks with my family, then that's what we'll do. If you don't see it as something that's right for me, then that's your plan for me. I prayed the serenity prayer, which is basically just surrendering and saying, hey, I'm not going to try to control this anymore. Like, and it was very freeing to be able to say, you know what, I'm not running this race anymore. You're running this for me right now. And I went back in front of my judge and she sat there in silence for about 30 seconds, which was like the most deafening 30 seconds of my life. And she agreed to let me go home. So I was able to spend 2 weeks with my parents prior to pleading guilty to the crimes that I was convicted of. And I was able to go to church. I was able to pray with my family. I was able to eat dinner with them and spend a little bit of time with them prior to leaving. So it was great, great 2 weeks right there. So
I want to know about the 6 years and the rest of your story, but I feel we could easily have your parents come on and talk their story of how God answers prayers. I can't imagine the million they had and how grateful and their view of God given. Take it from there.
They would probably love that. They know who both of you are. So my dad was, is it Homer? You are on, my dad has a friend named Craig and he does sportscasts out of Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. My dad knows who both of you are. When I was telling him your names this morning, he was like, oh my gosh, that guy appears on Craig's radio all the time. And so my dad knows who both of you are. My dad's incredibly devout. He's very, he's been my rock as far as that goes. And they would love to come on and talk to you guys about answered prayers.
I can't believe anything in his life has shown God's strength better than God answering their prayers about you.
Oh yeah. He'll absolutely testify to that. He would love that. He would love that. So yeah.
Back to your story.
Right. So the 6 years, after I pled guilty, I spent a couple more months. You have to go back into custody after you plead guilty. It's not a thing to stay out of custody at that point. So once you plea, you go back into custody, which I knew would happen. At this point, I kind of had a little bit of a different direction in my head. I was a little more relieved about the process and how things would go, probably because I had God on my side at this point and I had got back in touch with him. So I spent about 3 more months traveling from county jail to county jail in Wisconsin. There's a kind of a path that the federal government takes, and they eventually bring you to a county jail that will ship you down to an airport in Chicago. And they put you on a plane, hence Con Air, and they take you to a transfer center in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is massive. It's a humongous transfer center where people are flying in and out almost every day to different designated prisons. They put you on just a massive commercial airplane that's owned by the BOP, and they send you to all different types of places. And I waited there for about a week and a half, and then they sent me to a prison in Aliceville that they had just opened. 1,700 beds at Aliceville, humongous prison. It was brand new. I think there were probably maybe 100 inmates on the compound at that point. So I got there and I did 3.5 years there. And in those 3.5 years, I met some amazing people with some amazing stories. It is a lie that there are all bad people behind bars. They're not. I've met women there who have built up my faith because of their strength, of their faith. And we've gotten each other through all of this. Like, God has angels behind those bars. They're people who made mistakes. They're not bad people. Well, I can't speak for everyone, but all of the women that I have met that have helped me on my journey have been women of God. And I was able to get involved in the church there. I was able to end up in a position where I was able to lead Narcotics Anonymous and help women that way. I was in the choir. Someone told me I could sing. I don't know who lied to me, but I was active in the choir. And then about 3.5 years after I had gotten there, that's a higher security prison, and they drop your security status after you've been a good inmate after so long. And so they told me that I no longer qualified to be behind the fence of a big prison like that. And they ended up transferring me to a facility in Greenville, Illinois. It's a prison camp there. There are no fences. It almost looks like an elementary school when you're outside of it. It's kind of crazy. And I spent 3 more years there in a program called the Residential Drug Abuse Program. It's an amazing program that focuses on cognitive behavioral therapy to try to help those who are addicted and kind of see where some of these issues in your life come from that lead you to use drugs. There are plenty of people out there in the world who have gone through some of the same things that I've gone through, but they don't choose to pick up a drug to deal with it. They deal with it on life's terms. And one of the awesome things about that is that they allowed me to use my faith as part of my program. Not everyone uses faith as part of their program, but they allowed me to use my faith as part of my program to get better, which only strengthened it more. And it was just a phenomenal program. I mean, it changed my life as far as the way that I saw myself. I realized that drugs weren't necessarily the problem in my life. They were an end result to the void that I was trying to fill inside of me. And that void is my anxiety, my insecurities, my feelings of worthlessness, my feelings of I'm not good enough, things like that. And the cool thing about it is that all of those thoughts that I have in my head, I am able to find Bible verses that counter those thoughts, that would argue against those negative feelings I have towards myself. And I've found a verse, if not multiple verses, for all of those thoughts. So that was a massive part of my recovery, to be able to find those Bible verses that counter those negative feelings, because I chose to use drugs to deal with them. But the main problem is those things inside of you that you feel like you're not good enough, not worthy enough. Lots of people have those feelings. Not everybody chooses to do drugs to deal with them, but I did. So being able to find those verses and to pray to God and have him help me find those verses, and have conversations with women and say, things to them like, this is how I'm feeling today, and have them go find verses for me. There was multiple times where I've sat down with women and they will pull out their own Bible and they'll find a verse for me if I couldn't find it myself. So just really cool experiences there. Did a lot of work in like spiritual warfare while I was there. Got pretty heavy into that, and just incredible amount of support from my family, obviously. So I'm not.
And now the day. And now the day. I want the day when you get out of prison.
Now the day that I get out. Okay, so the day that I get out, I was incredibly nervous, of course, for like about 30 days prior to that. It's hard to even eat your food just because you're nervous, you're scared. But all you can do is really pray about it, talk about it, you're excited and whatever. And my parents came down and they were sitting in the parking lot. There were a couple of the officers that I had gotten to know very well and really looked up to as people. Out there talking to my parents, because my parents came to visit every like 2 months or so. They would come to visit me. So they got to know these people. There were a lot of very influential officers in that prison who helped change my life and gave me support and non-judgment and just an ear to listen, or an ear to talk to, or someone to listen to about these things. And they were standing out there with my parents, and you go in and you put, into release and whatever, and you put on your clothes that are human clothes again, and they're real and they're yours, and you walk out and you just walk into the parking lot, and there were my parents, and they're just standing there. And of course my dad goes up in tears and my mom goes up in tears, and I'm already in tears. And it was very, very intense. It was a beautiful day. It was gorgeous outside. And it was phenomenal. I was free. I'd never been to that part of the parking lot, because you're not supposed to go over there, but it was free. I was free. And I loved that day. That was a great day for me.
What day? How long ago?
It was September 5th, 2018. It was the day after my dad's birthday. So it was a great day. And of course, the first thing I wanted was McDonald's, because I wanted to eat McDonald's really bad. So we went there, and then we started the drive back to Milwaukee. My parents no longer lived in Madison at that point. They had moved to Oconomowoc. And from prison, you need to go to a halfway house. That's part of their transfer out of prison. And I had to go to a halfway house. So I went to a halfway house on 26th and Locust. So unfortunately, halfway houses don't really exist in nicer neighborhoods. But when I got there, the staff was amazing. I've never met such sweet people in my life. There were 3 women and like 29 guys. So big change of scenery for me, very strange, very strange situation to walk into. But I spent about a week there, and they ended up, my parents obviously had a home. It was a good home to go to, everything like that. So they agreed to release me to, I forget what it's called. It's like home custody, where you essentially have to have permission to leave home, but you can look for a job. You can, go shopping if you need to, all of these things. You're basically under halfway house rules, but you're living at home. So, and I spent about 2 weeks looking for a job and trying to get acclimated to life and everything like that. And that's when I found my job at Water Street Brewery. So here I am now. And I've been there for almost 3 years now. So since I got it.
I will defer to Tommy, but I do want to ask, my assumption is you're similar to everyone in terms of that you have to address that every day is another day, and you're capable of dropping back down into the addiction. My father was a alcoholic, and he always said that every day he wanted to drink. Every day he missed it. I don't know if that applies to your situation, which seems to have been possibly much more severe.
Well, I believe that every addict has their weak point. I don't necessarily experience the urge to use heroin or, another opiate. I dabbled in other drugs, but I would never actively like search them out. It was just something that if it was there, whatever. But there are definitely days where I sit there and I say, I just wish I could escape for a while, which if that thought is carried out might lead to that for me. But there are definitely days where I struggle with, I just don't want to feel this way anymore. The anxiety is too much today. The insecurities are too much today. And those feelings are dangerous feelings of wanting to escape, wanting to not have to feel that. How can I numb this? How can I run away from this? Because if you let that go on for too long, you're going to end up finding something to help you do that. And for people who are addicts, we know the escape. We know the route to go if we don't want to feel anything anymore. So do I feel that way? Sometimes, yeah, I do. And that's when my support system comes into play. That's when my honesty with myself and accountability with myself comes into play, as well as the others around me who know how I feel and know when there's a shift in me or a change in me. But that's absolutely when I have to open my Bible, when I have to reread those verses, when I have to remind myself of the things that I used to, that he put there in front of me to pull myself out, these tools that he gave me to use. So, but I completely relate with that. And I pray all the time for addicts who experience those feelings and choose to use that route, because it just ends you up worse than you were off before normally. Sometimes they say the relapse is worse than the first time around. The relapse can be the worst. And sometimes the relapse is the end of the story, unfortunately, for people. So
I have one last question, because given that in the rest of your life you will speak to millions of people, the person everybody in the world should hear from, that's your new name, Cassie. And there are so many stories in addition to your story. But if I listened to you, I would go, isn't it odd that you work at a bar?
yeah, it is. I mean, people, that was initially actually an issue that came up with my probation officer, my first probation officer. And she had to get it cleared actually by her like head office in Chicago for me to actually be able to work for Water Street. And she told her that she felt comfortable with me working there because she felt like I was on the right path enough that wasn't going to be an option. One thing I'm not ever doing in my life is going back to jail or prison. And I don't suggest it for anyone. It's not fun. It's especially county jail. I learned a lot while I was gone and everything like that. And I have met many friends and great people on that trip, but what it does to your family and the other consequences that come from doing that are not worth it in any way. And I knew I didn't want to screw up. I didn't want to put myself in jeopardy in that manner. I didn't want to deal with any of like the embarrassment or shame or just disappointment in myself for screwing up in any way. So I played it pretty close to the vest while I was on probation for everything. So she knew, she was comfortable letting me work there for that reason. But as time goes on, no drug is really different, whether it's alcohol, heroin, crack, methamphetamine, anything. The escape is the same. It just depends on which way you like to find it. And the escape is always there. I don't have to work at a bar to know that I could escape. I don't have to be in a really bad neighborhood to know that drugs are right there and I could, that's something that you actively choose to do, and it really doesn't matter how far you got to go to get it if that's what you really want. So the bar doesn't really bother me because it's there if I want it, but so is my hometown Madison. I could drive there in 45 minutes, but none of this stuff is worth it. I know that the escape isn't real. It's a temporary fix to a pretty bad hell. So it doesn't really bother me to work there. So
I deferred to Tommy.
okay.
No buts? No buts, buddy?
There'll be another one later.
I know.
All right, I'll go to you after I finish. I've got my butt. I
Yeah.
now know what the point of my faith is. My faith exists so people get a chance to listen to Cassie. Because at some point, I feel like she could be, we're with the Beatles in Liverpool. They'll go, what was she like? The world needs to hear her. And if for no other purpose, this gives people a chance to hear her first. Because when they do, everybody's going to want to hire her to tell her story of the addiction, her story of prison, her story of people in prison. And of course, most importantly to us, the belief that my faith is the, if not only way, the way that you beat this.
Mhm.
I think even, as I say this before, Tommy, even atheists would have to admit it. So there are just so many aspects. So yes, I look forward to, so what was Cassie like when you did this thing with her before she became Cassie? So now I'm done. Go ahead, Tommy, you can finish. That's what I wanted to say.
Homer, you can go on forever. You know that. I love it. I love it when you do that. And that's the way we roll. This was your vision. Cassie, do you want to respond to that statement, though?
What was I like prior to prison, like in my addiction or prior to my addiction?
No, why haven't people contacted you? Why don't people know your story? You have lived this and you have this incredible smile. There's no anger. There's no, my life stinks or did, and how could God do this to me? There's a joy in your face that should not exist.
Yeah, and it does. That's the wonderful part about him, is that, like, I'm terrible at remembering quotes and verses from like specific, numbers and everything like that. But there is a verse there that says, I will give you back what the locusts have eaten. And he did. He gave me back sevenfold what I had prior to addiction and all of those things. He gave me all that back. And there's no one that can tell me. When people try to argue it with me and they, want to say like, well, I don't want to hear about the God thing and everything like that. I'm telling you now, there's no other reason why I'm here. There's not. It was not me. I didn't do this by myself. I didn't put myself in this, series of events to get better, to get well, to become sober, to become happy again. I didn't do that for me. He did that for me. I wasn't capable of doing those things. And I've tried doing it myself. I've tried relying on other people to do it for me, everything like that. There's no logical, scientific, any kind of reason other than Jesus Christ that I'm standing here. There's no reason. You can't tell me. I'm living it myself. You can't tell me. You can argue with me all day long, but I'm saying that he interceded for me. That's the only reason. So I can't have met the people that I met. I can't have experienced the things that I've experienced. I can't have come across officers and inmates and federal agents who showed me compassion when I did not deserve it at that point. You can't tell me that all of these things weren't put together by God. I'd call you a liar.
Tears at night, but joy in the morning, and maybe tears of joy, Cassie Ritt. This has been marvelous. You said you were free when you saw your parents in the parking lot. I would respectfully disagree. I think you were free the day that you sat there and said, Lord, your will be done. If you want me to be free, fine, or, out of the confines. Mm-hmm. If not, how did you get to that stage, overcoming shame and pain, physical and emotional, and just grasping on to the love that is evident for all to see on the cross?
Well, something that, when you become clean from the drug, when it's no longer in your system anymore, when you don't have to experience maybe the effects of withdrawal, You obviously have a really big hole in you, but at that point, you have other feelings that you can't ignore anymore come into play, that guilt, that shame. And then there's a lot of, I don't like to say it, but there's a lot of hate and anger and rage and a lack of forgiveness. And what I wanted to be forgiven by the people that I had wronged in my life. I didn't want to carry that with me anymore. So I started to reach out to people who I had done wrong, starting with my mom and dad, my brother, people that maybe weren't blood family to me, but other people I had done wrong. And I did that because I wanted to be forgiven. And I knew that Jesus had died for me. I knew that he did that for my sins so that I could be forgiven, that I could walk free, essentially. But I had to work on doing that for other people to kind of, it was almost like I had to let him like shine through me in that sense, because there were people, and there were people even after I got out that I did not want to forgive. I was still angry with them. You know, you can't 100% let go of that until you literally just hand everything over to him. And there were some people that I didn't want to hand it over. I was comfortable with that anger that I felt. It's very easy to blame other people for the things that you've been through. But I'm kind of getting off track here, sorry. But being able to forgive those people and having him help me, praying so that I could have the heart to forgive those people, was a big thing for me. The guilt and the shame, I know my heart now, and I know that without the use of alcohol and drugs, without that clouding my judgment, my heart would have never done some of the things that I had done to people, the terrible things that I had done to people. So his example of forgiving me is something that I've had to apply to my own life. If he can forgive me for all of the things that I've done, why can't I extend grace and forgiveness to someone else? Especially if I'm looking for it from other people. I want my mom and dad to forgive me. I want that grace to grow and to become a different person. So why can't I extend it to others? It has to be something that you have to do. And that part in itself, when you let go of that guilt and that shame, you lose your reasons to use. You start to lose your get up to be like, yeah, I deserve to get high right now, or I just have to escape from that. Because if you're not struggling with those things at that capacity, what do you have to escape from? So forgiveness of yourself and others.
Yeah. When were you able to forgive yourself, and how big a component was your faith in that, Cassie?
I still work on forgiving myself for certain things. There are certain things that I still battle with sometimes. They're obviously not at the capacity that I used to battle with them, but I think when I started to forgive I wrote a series of letters to people, individual people that I was basically apologizing for things that I had done. And in writing those letters, I was asking for forgiveness and extending my apology, but also not expecting a response back from people. I was literally just extending this to them. And within writing those letters, he put that on my heart to do that about a year after I had gotten to Aliceville. So it was sometime in January of 2000. Well, maybe not a year after, but somewhere in January 2014, specifically, I remember writing a letter to a person that probably was the least likely person to forgive me. And I knew that I probably either would get no response back or it would be hateful. And it was the latter of the two. It was a very hateful letter back to me. But at the same time, when I wrote that letter, I knew that there was nothing else I could do to fix the situation. I had done everything, and it started with me becoming a different person and not repeating some of the things that I had done to that person, to other people. But I also knew that there was no change in my life that I probably could have made to make that person happy. And that's when I had to start forgiving myself, because if there's nothing else I can do and I'm doing everything I'm supposed to, then I don't want to live with that in me anymore. I shouldn't have to continue to suffer when I have changed, when I have, tried to be a better person. So that's when I really started to forgive myself for some of those things. And I prayed a lot. I just prayed a lot for people to not just forgive me, but also, to hopefully see that I'm actually doing the work to change instead of just saying the words. So it's a lot of patience.
And you're making the amends, as you know, in the 12 step. It's more for yourself, but the fact that you surrendered
Yeah.
to that extent is just beautiful and speaks to your faith. I've got just one more. I love it. If I know that mind to Homer, if he wants to, but for me, I think Homer's right. You could speak to millions. I mean, I wish this is for millions to hear. That's why we want to grow it. That's Homer's mission, because your impact, you might save a life today. You never know.
I want to.
Have you ever thought about what you want to do in the future? Have you ever said, okay, God, we've gone through this together.
Mhm.
He's given you gifts of speaking, communicating, connecting with people.
Mhm.
What have you thought about regarding your future?
Well, I'm actually in the process of it right now. I've gotten to a point in my life where I feel like I have to do something that I feel like I'm giving back. I was given this gift, and it's not to be kept underneath a lamp. It's meant to shine. It's meant to be there for other people. It wasn't just something that was given to me. It's an example. I'm just an example. I'm supposed to spread that message. I'm supposed to do something that ignites a passion in me. And that's really what I want to do. So I'm in the process, actually, of looking at things in the addiction field where I would be able to, I don't know what capacity it's in. I'm working on that. I'm praying on that. Like I said before, God plays jokes. He's a pretty funny guy. And he's actually recently, within just the past 2 weeks of kind of having this like epiphany situation where I need to make moves and do this, he's brought people into my life in the gym that I'm in right now who are in recovery. Just randomly tell me that they're in recovery. They all go to a meeting that's maybe 5 minutes from my house. The opportunity to do this, like some of the things that are just coming into play right now, like obviously I didn't put them together. He's got a plan, and like I needed to be open to seeing that. So we're working on that. I'm not 100% sure that, going back to school and getting a bachelor's degree is necessarily my bag, but something in this field where I can speak and tell people, there's hope. There's another life for you out there. There's options for you. It doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to wake up and feel like crap every single morning of your life. You don't have to get high to feel free, to escape. This is the great escape right here. This is the great escape. And it's there if you want it. I just want to spread that message to people. I want to tell people that. I want to help people. I don't want to see people die anymore.
Mm-hmm. Homer, wrap it up as only you can with Cassie.
Oh no, now I have a title. It's The Great Escape. That's you just gave it to me. I'm done.
A t-shirt coming your way soon. Cassie, we'll be forever grateful. This was powerful to you, to our producer, Brent Young, and it will be really neat to see what you and God figure out in your future as you go forward. And we'll be with you in prayer as well. This has been marvelous. Thanks for your willingness.
Thank you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to, even if one person hears it, even if somebody's mom hears it today, even if somebody's dad watches it, or they have a relative, anybody who's struggling with addiction, I mean, there's hope. I don't know what path it's going to take somebody to get there. He's got a plan. I'm sure of it. Everybody's plan looks a little bit different, but there's hope. I'm here. I'm standing here, and I shouldn't be. So there's hope.
That's right. He's got a great escape for everyone.
He does. He has it. It's already planned and in the books.
Right.
Faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And boy, his love is just, it's pouring out of you, and it will bless many others. So this has been My Faith with Homer and Pip and Cassie Ritt. God bless you, everybody. If you have an idea for another guest, pippinstom@yahoo.com, Pipines, pippinstom@yahoo.com. Have a great day. Thank you for being with us for this special time with Cassie.